June. We got one in July and August.
Hurry up, Lester. We're about to be on the air.
October.
Well, I had one of each of those sheets, and I only have one of them.
Well, I can't finish it.
What do you mean one of each?
Don't you have two different bingo sheets?
No, I mean, it's all the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You only need one bingo
I
sheet.
thought there were two different ones.
That'd be great.
Well, okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
So a couple things. One, yeah, I had my answer sheet, and when I went to cut the bingo cards as they came, on pages of 2, I cut my answer sheet, and I spent 10 minutes looking for it before I gave up and just printed off another one. But that mystery's been solved. Next, I will address Lester's question that he just asked, which is, don't I need 2 bingo sheets? No. I got this off of a free website, so you can tell how high quality these are.
Professional.
But I basically got like 30 of these for free, and I guess it was like 15 pages, 2 bingo cards each page, kind of randomly generated. It's all the same words, but they're just randomly generated in different order. But I thought, well, rather than just print out 6 sheets, I'll just print the same sheet like 3 times. And so that's what I did. And so, yeah, there were 2 different variations. You're either going to have one with God as a lion in the middle, or I don't even know what the other
numbers,
one is.
001 and 002.
There you go. So, but it's all the same. So don't feel like you're missing out on anything. It's all the exact same words.
Slided.
Yeah, we're kind of sort of playing bingo. Not, we're not going to get the roller thing and call it out quite like that.
Bingo.
That actually, that would be fun.
That has a ring to it.
That would be fun. But here's the thing. I know I've said this before on all the books that kind of go along, but the minor prophets kind of repeat themselves, and that's true. And chapter 13 especially is something that I kind of really struggled to find new things to say that I feel like I haven't already said. So I thought, well, we have a lot of the same language that we've seen at least once before, if not, several times before. So I thought it'd be fun to just sort of, be a little bit more goofy than usual. Not that we ever take ourselves too seriously in here. And kind of do bingo, although it's a little, it's a little bit different because we're not really playing bingo. But, I thought it'd be funnier to put it on a bingo card than just list these out. And this is something you can hang on your fridge or something and impress all of your, church friends. So gotta find the right paper here. Okay. So we have mention of Baal worship, and so for all of these, what I was planning on you doing is just writing down in the blank or in the space on your little bingo card where this is mentioned specifically in chapter 13. And then, if you want to, you can go back and kind of see where these have been talked about previously in Hosea. But in terms of chapter 13, and I'm sort of going in order of verses, not in order of any of the bingo cards. But in verse 1, we see Baal worship. Chapter 13, verse 1, when he offended through Baal worship, he died. So the one that I have, Baal worship, is like first column, second row, just write 13:1. Verse 3, we have mention of the calves, the golden calves of Jeroboam. And so that's verse 3. Verse 4, we have a callback to the Exodus. Verse 5, a callback to the Exodus, wandering. So in verse 4, you have, I'm the Lord your God since the land of Egypt. And then in verse 5, I knew you in the wilderness in the land of great drought. Moving on, God referring to himself as a lion comes in verse 7. A prophecy about the end of the monarchy is verse 11. Anyone got a bingo yet? 3 in a row? Yeah, there we go. You're all the winner tonight because it's all the same cards. Agricultural disaster is verse 15. Verse 15. An east wind shall come, the wind of the Lord shall come up from the wilderness, his spring shall become dry. So that's agricultural disaster. And then verse 16 is a call back to Shalman. Shalman first mentioned in chapter 10. And that's verse 16 of chapter 13. And then you'll notice the whole, there should be one spot left that says chapter break in the middle of the section. You can just put 13:1 and 13:16. 13:1 is generally, well, I say generally, it can be included with the previous chapter as sort of a conclusion to what that was saying. And then in the Hebrew text, our verse 16 of chapter 13 is actually verse 1 of chapter 14. So in the Hebrew, chapter 14 would have 10 verses, beginning with our 13:16. So, yeah, I just thought it was funny, there's kind of this joke, if someone or something repeats themselves enough, you can create a bingo card about it. For instance, I know when I was in college, I had to have like 6 semesters of chapel. And as soon as I got my 6 semesters out of the way, I never went back because we could literally make chapel bingo cards. And some madman actually did that at one point. And every single week, we would all bingo out because it was just the exact same stuff every single week. And it got kind of boring. But anyway, so I thought, okay, well, that would be kind of funny to do for Hosea. But also a good reminder of, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about this week, we've already seen a lot of in the past. So moving on, Paul's usage of Hosea part 1. And I'll read this, and then before we get into the next section, I'll actually read the chapter. So kind of out of order this week. But if you've been in church long enough, you've heard some variation of verse 14, O death, this is the New King James, O death, I will be your plagues, O grave, I will be your destruction. That talk about the like t-shirt or throw pillow type of verse, like that's one of them. And we have songs about this. This is, oh, I got to do a devotional on Sunday, but I don't have anything to do. Oh, I'll just do that verse or that phrase. But most of the time, when we think of this, we associate it with 1 Corinthians. So Paul quotes from Hosea in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 55. And this is where my paper and your paper start to line up a little bit. So you can see there the quote from 1 Corinthians, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? And then Paul is likely using some Greek manuscript because that was what they did at the time. And so we don't know which one, but compare this to an English translation of the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, which says, where is your penalty, O death? O Hades, where is your sting? So similar, but a little bit different there. And then for reference, I added the New King James and the NIV translation of Hosea 13:14. New King James says, O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction. NIV says, where, O death, are your plagues? Where, O grave, is your destruction? So, there's not even really a consensus from different versions of the Old Testament as to how it should be translated. But okay, let's talk about Paul's usage of Hosea for a moment. Similar to how we talked about Matthew's usage of Hosea a few weeks ago, in chapter 11, out of Israel or out of Egypt, I called my son. Let's talk about how Paul uses it. So again, Paul probably used some Greek manuscript. I mean, this would not be an uncommon thing. But like I said, I mean, the Septuagint does differ slightly from the wording that Paul uses. I mean, the Septuagint has the word penalty and also Hades. And then, like I said, even when dealing just with Hosea 13 and not even really worrying about Paul and what version of Hosea he's reading from, we still get different translations as to Hosea 13:14. And so this is your fill in the blank for this. We need to understand the context of Hosea 13 and determine how Hosea uses the phrase before we can assess whether Paul uses the phrase correctly or not. Because Paul is quoting from Hosea. So with that, we will read chapter 13 and then get into how Hosea uses this phrase. What is the context? What is the build up to verse 14? Not that verse 14 is really the climax of this chapter, although I'm kind of framing it in that way for this study. But okay, what is the lead up? What is the context? And then how is Hosea using the phrase? Because just because Paul uses the same words as Hosea doesn't necessarily mean they're using them the same way, right? We have similar instances of English, I can say a phrase and mean it in some sort of metaphorical way, and if you interpret it very literally, you're going to be very confused, right? But anyway, we'll see how Hosea uses the phrase, and then at the end we'll come back and go back into 1 Corinthians and see how Paul uses it and if it adds up or not. So beginning in verse 1 of chapter 13, when Ephraim spoke, trembling, he exalted himself in Israel. But when he offended through Baal worship, he died. Now they sin more and more, and have made for themselves molded images, idols of their silver according to their skill. All of it is the work of craftsmen. They say of them, let the men who sacrifice kiss the calves. Therefore they shall be like the morning cloud, and like the early dew that passes away, like chaff blown off from a threshing floor, like smoke from a chimney. Yet I am the Lord your God, ever since the land of Egypt. And you shall know no God but me, for there is no Savior besides me. I knew you in the wilderness, in the land of great drought. When they had pasture, they were filled. They were filled, and their heart was exalted. Therefore they forgot me. So I will be to them like a lion. Like a leopard by the road I will lurk. I will meet them like a bear deprived of her cubs. I will tear open their rib cage, and there I will devour them like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them. O Israel, you are destroyed, but your help is from me. I will be your king. Where is any other, that he may save you in all of your cities? Where is any other that he may save you in all your cities? And your judges to whom you said, give me a king and princes. I gave you a king in my anger, and took him away in my wrath. The iniquity of Ephraim is bound up. His sin is stored up. The sorrows of a woman in childbirth shall come upon him. He is an unwise son. For he should not stay long when he shall not stay long where children are born. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction. Pity is hidden from my eyes. Though he is fruitful among his brethren, an east wind shall come. The wind of the Lord shall come up from the wilderness. Then his spring shall become dry, and his fountain shall be dried up. He shall plunder the treasury of every desirable prize. Samaria is held guilty, for she has rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword, their infants shall be dashed in pieces, and their women with child ripped open. So, okay. Hosea's repetition, and this gets into the whole bingo card idea that we've sort of been talking about. Starting with, the first 3 verses of chapter 13. We see the mention once again of Baal worship. That was one of the things on our bingo card. Jeroboam's golden calves, one of the things on our bingo card. Israel is being condemned for the same sins we've been reading about for 13 chapters, basically, which is why I say it gets kind of hard to find things to say, because a lot of this we've already talked about pretty in depth. But really, Hosea is building an argument here. And like I said, we want to sort of track that argument building up to verse 14. So notice especially the phrase in 13:1, when Baal worship, he died. Now, like I said, to be fair, 13:1 can go with or be a part of the previous section of chapter 12, but obviously in some ways it all does run together. And like I've already pointed out, a couple weeks ago when I had the poorly color-coded list of different themes throughout the book of Hosea, and then now with our little bingo chart thing we got going on, there's a repetition of themes. There's a lot of callbacks to previous parts of the book. Even, in one chapter he'll make a callback to something in Israel's history, and then a couple chapters later he'll make a callback to that callback, and then it just gets really confusing. So we have a lot of repetition, and so in a sense, even if 13:1 belongs with the previous chapter, it all does sort of flow together, and it's all building off of each other, and it's all sort of repeating the same ideas. So back to 13:1, right? When he offended through Baal worship, he died. This comes immediately after 12:14. Therefore, the Lord will leave the guilt of his bloodshed upon him and return reproach on him. So, and return his reproach upon him. Sorry. So, 12:14, focus in on guilt of his bloodshed. Okay. So you have 13:1. He, offended through Baal worship, but he died. So died, focusing on that. 12:14, guilt of his bloodshed. Focusing on that. Then go back up 2 verses, 12:12 and 12:13. This is the 2 shepherds, right? Jacob, the very literal shepherd, Moses, more of a metaphorical shepherd we talked about last week. And I brought up last week when we covered these verses the idea that Israel was essentially rejecting Moses through their idolatry and their syncretizing of pagan religion and true religion. By extension of rejecting Moses, they were also rejecting the covenant that God made with Moses, the covenant that they were under, right? And so they will incur the punishment of that, which is death, right? So 12 and 13, rejecting the covenant, which brings 12:14, the guilt of bloodshed, and then 13:1, right, he died. So you can see, right, the sort of pattern here and how it's all building off of each other. Okay, so this is where you start to see stuff actually on your handout, as opposed to me just talking to you. So Deuteronomy 4, verses 25 and 26. When you beget children and grandchildren and have grown old in the land, and act corruptly and make a carved image in the form of anything, and do evil in the sight of the Lord your God to provoke him to anger, that's my emphasis there, why it's bolded, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, and you will soon utterly perish from the land which you cross over to the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days in it, but will be utterly destroyed. Now, look at 12:14. And again, keep in mind that 12:14 comes right after 12:12 and 12:13. 12:12 and 12:13 are all about, okay, Moses is a shepherd, and they rejected Moses as the shepherd, and by extension, rejected the covenant of Moses, which means that they're going to reap the consequences of that, the covenantal curses, which are death. So 12:14 of Hosea, Ephraim once again provoked him to anger most bitterly. Therefore his Lord will leave the guilt of his bloodshed upon him and return his reproach upon him. So rejecting Moses brings the consequences of that. What are the consequences of that? Well, Deuteronomy, you provoke and you will be utterly destroyed. Well, 12:14 of Hosea, they provoked and God said, the bloodshed will be upon you, and I'm going to return your reproach upon you, and all that. So it's the same cause, provoking God, which leads to the same punishment of perishing and bloodshed and reproach and all of these, bad things that we read about. Right. So let me see. Okay, yeah. So this is all the same. I think this entire paragraph is pretty much the same on my paper and yours. So here we go. All you have to do is, for the most part, I think, fill in, with the exception of like one word, you just have to fill in verse notations. So it's all just verses. Israel did not follow their shepherd example or the covenant made with him. Chapter 12, verse 13. But they provoked the Lord to anger. Chapter 12, verse 14. This resulted in bloodshed, which is a curse under the covenant. So now, getting back into 13:1, I'm just making sure that it's all the same on my page and yours. Getting back into 13:1, when he offended through Baal worship, he died. The death of Israel as a political entity. That's the only word that you're going to have to actually, for this section anyway, I think, fill out. The death of Israel as a political entity. Or you can just say as a political kingdom, same idea gets across. The death of Israel as a political entity has been prophesied all throughout Hosea's ministry, and yet they sin more and more, as we see in verse 2 of chapter 13. The people ignore Hosea, and that's why he repeats himself so much in this chapter. He's emphasizing that even in spite of Israel's death already being prophesied, and this Israel's political death already being prophesied, this is chapter 1, verse 6, chapter 10, verse 8, and then chapter 10, verse 15. You can copy off of your neighbor next to you if you need to. Okay, so I'll just keep going. So Israel continues to reject God's covenant. You see that in verse 2 and verse 3. And by the time we reach 13:4, we see once again God reminding Israel of their origins. This is your next blank. This is chapter 9, verse 10. So God reminding Israel of their origins, chapter 9, verse 10, and chapter 12, verse 9. Yet Israel forgot me, it says in verse 6 of chapter 13. So when we reach verse 7, we see the lion language. This is chapter 5, verses 14 through 15. And chapter 11, verse 10. And God promises bloodshed once again in verse 8. And then that's chapter 12, verse 14. In verses 9 through 11, we see mention of kings. I said see above because I don't know that it's on your page, but on my page I already put the verses down for this. But I think when editing your page, it might not be on there. Actually, I think what I was getting. Okay, so the emphasizing in spite of Israel's death already being prophesied, those verses also line up with the mention of kings. See above parentheses. So if you want to draw an arrow or something, so you know, there you go. And then finally, Hosea is essentially asking, who is going to save you? And see chapter 10, verse 3, where the same question is asked. So that was a paragraph of plugging in verses. Did we miss any? Because I know that was a lot. And a lot in very quick section.
Well, read over them again. After prophesied, it's
Okay, well, where are you at?
in the middle of that paragraph where it says,
Okay,
so
so
Israel's death already being prophesied.
okay, so Israel's death already being prophesied. That's chapter 1, verse 6,
Okay.
chapter 10, verse 8, and verse 15 of chapter 10. Next would be Israel of their origins, chapter 9, verse 10, chapter 12, verse 9.
Okay.
Next line, the lying language, chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, and chapter 11, verse 10. The promised bloodshed we've seen in chapter 12, verse 14. And then who is going to save you, chapter 10, verse 3. So that gets you out of the first page. So one down, one to go. Unless you're me, in which case I have a page and a half left. Okay, so fun. So in summary, and this is also the same on mine and yours, so this makes this easy. We have transgression. And if you notice, right, before you write anything down, if you notice, this is also color-coded for a reason. Sort of A-B pattern we have going on here. So we have transgression, chapter 12, verses 13 through 14a, or the first half of verse 14. So 12, 13 through 14a is transgression, which brings about bloodshed and death on a corporate level. This is chapter 12, verse 14b through 13:1. So 12, 14b through 13:1. Then you have continued transgression and ignoring Hosea's warnings. This is chapter 13, verses 2 through 6. Which bring about bloodshed and death on a corporate level, chapter 13, verses 7 through 11. So, that was a lot of verses basically to say, again, really you could start reading in about verse 12 of chapter 12. And maybe we should have done that. But oh well. Right. Jacob, he served for a spouse, he tended sheep. Likewise, verse 13 of chapter 12, by a prophet Moses, the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt like a shepherd, and by a prophet was preserved. Very similar language. But Ephraim provoked God to anger, so they rejected not only the shepherd, but also the covenant given with that shepherd. If you're rejecting the covenant, you're going to reap the covenantal curses, which is bloodshed. So 14b, therefore his Lord will leave the guilt of his bloodshed upon him and return his reproach upon him. So that's sort of one cycle, right? This is just the spinning top. It just keeps on going, right? The A-B pattern, it just keeps on going. So that's like one cycle of this, basically, right? Transgression, which reaps the consequences of transgressing the covenant, which is bloodshed. Then we get into chapter 13. Ephraim, or Israel, is still offending through Baal worship. verse 2, they sin more and more. Verse 3, you have, the end of verse 2, you have the golden calves. It says, they shall be like the morning cloud. And so you have continued transgression. So sort of the start of a new cycle, the spinning top, it just goes round and round. And then going into like verse 7, you have the lion. Well, what's the lion going to do? Okay. I'm going to tear out their rib cage. Very, very brutal, but bloodshed again. Same stuff we've already seen, but the cycle continues. Transgressing the covenant, rejecting the covenant, reaping the consequences of that, which is bloodshed. And then that goes all the way up till the end of verse 13. So in verses 12 and 13, Israel's likened to a baby that, this is the NIV version, doesn't have the sense to come out of the womb. And obviously, if you're a fetus that doesn't have sense to come out of the womb, you're dead, right? You're not going to make it. You and the mother both. And this is especially true in Hosea's time. They didn't exactly have hospitals back then. And so, right, it was very important that, the fetus would get in the proper birthing position, or else it wouldn't be birthed, and then it would die, and most likely the mother would die as well. And it was a very bad thing to have children, so all of you mothers, be thankful that you were alive back then. But it's interesting because it does call Israel foolish in this sort of metaphor of the fetus, but obviously, a fetus isn't really foolish if it doesn't birth properly, because it's not its fault. It can't, it's not really rational at that point. So again, it is just a metaphor. Don't read too deeply into this. But, a baby that doesn't have the sense to come out of the womb, okay, well, obviously this leads to death. However, in spite of Israel's foolishness, God says, verse 14, I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. And this is where we get our throw pillow verse. O death, I will be your plagues. O death, I will be your destruction. Pity is hidden from my eyes. So now that we're basically caught back up to verse 14, which is kind of where we started, we still haven't answered some questions. And you'll see this on your handout. One, which translation is actually correct for chapter 4, for verse 14? And two, how is Hosea using this phrase? We've seen the context, we've seen the buildup, we've seen the cycle, but, okay, we still haven't talked about the translation or how exactly Hosea is using this. So, before, obviously, like I said, before we can get into how Paul uses it, we have to talk about Hosea. So, to answer the first question, rendering the phrase in the form of a question, like if you go back to your first page, the NIV, where, O death, are your plagues? Where, O grave, is your destruction? Or even the Septuagint, where is your penalty, O death? O Hades, where is your sting? That's probably the more likely translation. Not only because it is backed up by the Septuagint, but also just sort of the context itself kind of leads there. I got some Hebrew. I'm not expecting you to know it. But rather than the word I will be, that's in your little parentheses there, rather than I will be, the word is likely where. And if you notice, the words are very similar. You have the X-looking letter. You have, I don't know. I guess it looks like a pi symbol or something. I don't know. And then the little line in the air, right? And so by basically just changing some of the vowels and flipping the line in the air and the pi symbol, you get a completely different word. And that's probably what the word actually was in the very first writing of Hosea, which obviously we don't have. And that's probably the Greek manuscript, the Greek Septuagint, right, when they were translating from the Hebrew, that explains why they ended up with where in this verse in the form of a question, because that's likely the original word. But anyway, so yeah, rather than I will be, like the New King James translates it, I will be your plague, it's likely where. Where is your plague? Where is your destruction? So, okay, moving on. As to how Hosea uses the phrase, which was our second question we had to answer. And again, this is sort of what is his purpose in using this? What does he mean when he uses this? We've seen this pattern now twice of covenantal transgression leading to bloodshed and political death. And then the cycle starts back over. And, we just saw Israel being called in the verse right before this, verse 13, essentially so stupid that if you were a fetus, you wouldn't even know to be born and you would just sit there and die in the womb. Basically, I've heard a lot of like playground insults in my life, but that's a new one, that's I don't know if you're ever in a rap battle, I guess, you might want to pull that one out from your repertoire. I don't know. It might make a good roast. But now, right, in verse 14, God is saying he will deliver Israel from the power of death. And he basically kind of mocks death, right? Kind of mocking language we see here. Death and the grave. But then the verse ends, right? Verse 14 ends with, I will have no compassion, as the NIV puts it, or as the New King James, pity is hidden from my eyes. So it's kind of weird because you have, y'all are ignorant, y'all are stupid, basically, the Parker Smith translation, because y'all transgressed the covenant. Boo, sad, nobody likes that. But then happy, I will rescue you from death. I will rescue you from the grave. Everyone likes that. That's happy, that's uplifting. And then at the end of that verse, but I will not have compassion. Boo, sad, nobody likes that. That's depressing, right? And so sandwiched in between the happiness, the part that's quoted and the part that we know is sandwiched in between these two very strongly worded sentences about Israel's rebellion. And again, remember when I sort of traced out that very, again, poorly color-coded list of themes throughout the book of Hosea, one of them was judgment before restoration. And this is sort of an example of that. However, and this should be your first blank, this would actually be judgment before resurrection, not just restoration. So judgment before resurrection. So again, in this pattern of transgression, bloodshed being promised, more transgression, more bloodshed being promised, we see on a wide scale, corporate Israel is done for, right? Verse 1, it just says they're dead, right? You offended through the Baal, and now you are dead, right? He died. However, for the individual, there is still hope. And this should be your second blank. Israel, in parentheses, the nation. Israel, the nation, will not get another king, right? They're not going to gain political independence from Assyria. They're not going to come back from exile. They're not going to rebuild. But some of Israel, and then this is another blank, parentheses, the people, some of the people of Israel will be ransomed from the power of the grave. Now, as to the extent to which the people who originally heard this oracle from Hosea understood what Hosea meant is kind of unknown. And we don't want to sort of read this through the lens of Paul in 1 Corinthians, because they didn't really have the same sort of theology of resurrection that we do as Christians. After all, Christ had not died yet, nor had he been resurrected. So, I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't have a concept of the resurrection, but it was very different. So we don't want to read too much of our Christian theology into specifically what Hosea is saying in chapter 13. So, again, as to the extent of how the hearers of this understood the hopeful aspect, we don't know. But again, the fact that this is sandwiched between, one, a comparison of Israel to a fetus that is dying, and then two, God saying he will not have compassion, I think is very telling. And the emphasis is on judgment and not the hope of resurrection, right? Okay, yeah, that's not one of your blanks. Good. Okay, I got confused for a second. Yeah, so the emphasis is on the judgment, not the resurrection. I mean, obviously it's there, but that's not Hosea's primary emphasis here. The east wind, right, that we see in verse 15, though he is fruitful among his brethren, an east wind shall come. The wind of the Lord shall come up from the wilderness. Then his spring shall become dry, his fountain shall be dried up. He shall plunder the treasury of every desirable prize. So that east wind is going to come and create chaos in Israel, right? Going back to your bingo sheet, the agricultural disaster, right? That's verse 15. That's what we're talking about, right? Obviously, this most likely being a reference to Assyria, right? And then going on into verse 16, right? Bloodshed is prophesied because of transgression. It says, Samaria is held guilty, for she has rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Bloodshed. Their infants shall be dashed in pieces. Bloodshed. Their women with child ripped open. Bloodshed, right? So it's almost an entire third cycle of this that we've seen that really began in 12:13, that we see like 3 cycles of going through the end of chapter 13 of transgression, which leads to bloodshed. You transgress, I prophesy bloodshed. You don't care, you transgress more, I prophesy more bloodshed. You still don't care, you transgress even more, I prophesy more bloodshed. And it goes on, and the top just keeps spinning, right? So the fact remains, right? After judgment, there is hope. So even if, once again, the emphasis is not on the resurrection, but on the judgment, the fact still remains that after the judgment, there is hope, particularly for the remnant who turn to God and serve him, right? Because again, like we said, corporate Israel, they're done for. And we see that in verse 1, it says they died. And then just straight up, I mean, right, I will be your king. Where is any other that he may save you in all your cities? And your judges to whom you said, give me a king and your princes. I gave you king in my anger and took him away in my wrath, right? So God says, again, right, like on your bingo card, end of monarchy, that's one of your blanks, right? We've seen this all throughout Hosea, right? Corporate Israel's done, right? Political independence, the monarchy, it's done. Individuals, however, the people, right? They have this hope of this resurrection, whatever that means, again, because they probably didn't exactly have a full understanding of what Hosea meant by this. But, right, for the remnant who turn to God and serve him, this is especially true. This is a much more metaphorical usage than what we find in 1 Corinthians with Paul. And I think that this is your blank, I think. Yes. Hosea did not likely envision a literal bodily resurrection. And I'm not saying that he didn't agree with the concept of a bodily resurrection at all. Just in the context of this verse, that's not really what he's talking about likely. But that the metaphorical fetus, which is Israel, that died of ignorance, can be metaphorically resurrected by God, right? But this all happens after judgment, right? Judgment before restoration, judgment before resurrection. And just like when we we're at the judgment before restoration passages, I mean, we said the same thing. I mean, in the same chapter that you have, I'm going to end your kings, and, I'm going to bring a drought and bring a plague and bring the end of your crops, and you're going to be done for as a nation. There's these sort of restoration passages. And again, we said the same thing there. That's not on a corporate level. That's on a more individual level, right, with the remnant. So you have Israel, the sort of metaphorical fetus that has died because of their ignorance. Well, metaphorically, they're going to be resurrected, right? Obviously, metaphorically, in some sense, because, I mean, the people that were exiled, the people that were killed, the people that died from starvation or by sword or whatever, I mean, they weren't literally like resurrected back to life and, oh, it's Uncle Jim, man, I thought you died over in Assyria. Oh, no, I got resurrected. Like, I mean, obviously that didn't happen. So it's metaphorical to some capacity. But yeah, probably, resurrection in terms of new beginnings, right? Think of it this way, the cycle being broken, right, for the remnant. This cycle that we've seen now 3 times of transgression brings bloodshed. The resurrection is, okay, you're the remnant, you're following God, you're trusting in God. That's breaking that cycle, right, of the transgression because you're following God, so you're not transgressing, on a large scale, which means no more promised bloodshed, right, which is like a resurrection. It's like new life, right, new beginnings. So going on finally into Paul's usage of Hosea. Paul's usage of Hosea, part 2. We can finally answer the question of whether Paul uses the phrase correctly or not. So look at the context of Paul's writings. I gave you some verses before and some verses after verse 55. So starting in verse 54, when the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true, death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And that is 54 through 56. So death's sting, or death's plague, as Hosea puts it, is death. This is your first blank. By being ignorant to the law, Israel sinned and incurred death. So death's sting or death's plague is death. By being ignorant to the law, Israel sinned and incurred death. God promises in Hosea that a resurrection can occur even though the ignorant baby had died. Even though Israel died on a large scale, a resurrection can occur. Similarly, even though Paul's readers have incurred death as a result of ignorance to God's law, a resurrection can occur, right? Unlike Hosea's audience, which likely didn't know the full extent of what Hosea said, and likely not even Hosea really understood the full extent of what he said, Paul understands that this resurrection can only come about through Jesus Christ. Plus, the resurrection that Paul envisions is much more literal than the one in Hosea, because Paul writes elsewhere extensively about a bodily resurrection. So, to answer the question, does Paul use Hosea rightly? Yeah, actually, right? Because, and this is your final fill in the blank, both, that is both Hosea and Paul, present the idea of transgression leading to death, leading to a possible resurrection. One is just slightly more literal than the other. But you have transgression, death, and then resurrection. And that's all I got for 13. Still managed to get an hour out of it, so, there we go. We only got one chapter left after this, and it's short. It's 9 verses. So we'll do that. We're not meeting next week, right? Because I didn't schedule that in my tentative schedule.
Meeting when?
Like next Wednesday. since it's
Oh,
VBS.
Bible school.
Okay. So
Hadn't thought about that.
the tentative schedule still stands. Take a week off.
Concentrate on Bible school.
Use that time to get your biblically mandated nap because you're going to need it after dealing with kids all day at Bible school. 2 weeks from now, we'll come back and we'll finish Hosea. And then after that, going to do a recap of the entire, all of the minor prophets. And that sounds like we're going to be here forever, but I promise I will do my best to keep it very concise. Like a couple bullet points for each book. So we'll do that, and then we'll hit the book of James because I only have 5 weeks left. And then I'm gone, and I ride into the sunset. And I'm just a distant memory.
Just don't fall off your horse.
Just don't fall off my horse. All right. Any questions, or did anyone miss a blank or anything before I hand it over?
No, but I sure had a lot of different wording in my Bible than what you did.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at
It
that
was
too.
huge, yeah. It was a big difference. Because you have the King James, right?
Yeah, that's why.
Well, it's all based off the same text, but what
Yeah.
specifically,
Well,
what
really,
stood out to you?
Like the baby, I had nothing about him except that it was, well, I don't know. It's different. So which verse is the baby in?
So that's 13:13. The sorrows of a woman in childbirth shall come upon him. He is unwise, for he should not stay long where children are born.
Okay, well that's closer than I thought it was.
So that's the New King James. The NIV is
You want me to-
the baby doesn't have the sense to come out of the womb.
yeah, see that.
So, but it's the same concept, right?
Yeah, it is. It's
Um,
the same concept.
and they're
It just says that it is a child without wisdom. When the time arrives, he does not come to the opening of the womb.
Is that the NIV you're talking about?
Yeah.
What NIV are you talking about? There's 2 versions.
there's several versions. Go to the copyright and see what
Not,
year
does it
you're
say
dealing with.
1984?
Mine is one of the older ones.
Mine says 85, and I thought that the same one as Marcia's.
I'm sorry.
Mine was like Marshall's too.
Yeah.
I think ours is 84.
The more of these English translations that come along, the more changes are made.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all good stuff. So the NIV pulls from different texts. It's not based off a single text of the Hebrew. So the New King James and the King James are based off of the Masoretic, which is all right. The Masoretes, the guy who added the little dots and dashes to Hebrew, right? They're the people who produced the Masoretic text. That's what the King James and the New King James are based off of. The NIV pulls from like everything. And in a way, it's better because through archaeology, I mean, think Dead Sea Scrolls, we have older manuscripts to pull from. And so, but it's not based on any one group of manuscripts. So it might pull from the Masoretic and translate a verse that way. And then the next person might say, oh, well, actually, the Septuagint translates this the best way, so we go with that. Or the Dead Sea Scrolls have this, and that's more likely, so we pull from there.
What copyright are you reading from?
So when I do the NIV, it's 2011. That's the newest version produced.
See, this is the 10th anniversary. Copyright 95.
Yeah.
Mine the same as hers.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see, because I could have marked that down.
Occasionally,
I could
have trouble finding where he's at.
I could have marked it down wrong, but I can always Google it. Hosea 13:13.
Well, when you get to looking at it, they basically say the same
Yeah, they
thing.
say the same thing.
It's just in a different way and how
Different way
yeah.
to say it, yeah.
So this is the 2011 NIV. When the time comes, he doesn't have the sense to come out of the womb. Is that what I had down?
I think so.
Yes, doesn't have the sense to come out of the womb. So
And mine says, for he should not stay long in the place of the breaking forth of children. So that's the same way of saying that, but it's just a
It's a different wording, but it's the same meaning.
Yeah, as to what specifically, because I didn't really look at that verse in terms of its translation history, as to why specifically there's a difference there and what the NIV is basing that translation off of, I don't know.
It's still saying the same thing. It's just in a different.
It's the same idea.
Yeah. I mean, it could be based off the Septuagint. It could be based off something from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I really don't know.
Yeah.
But
In the day of the Septuagint, they had a different way of looking at things, and so that's why they worded some of it differently. But it's still
it gets worded differently because, well, when we read the Septuagint, it gets worded differently because we're reading a translation of a translation, and then. Yeah, I mean, the Septuagint is based off of older manuscripts than anything that we have. So in a way, I actually encourage all of you, if you never have, to read through the Septuagint. Because what it has going for it is that it is the oldest version of some of the Old Testament that we have. Because it's older than any Hebrew manuscript that we have currently. But it's a translation of the Hebrew, not the Hebrew itself. So already by default, as to how translation works, you're losing some of that language. And that's where we get differences. You have like the Greek Orthodox Church that solely uses the Septuagint. But most churches prefer to use the older Hebrew manuscripts, and even though in time we're farther away from the original, the argument is, well, we're in a sense closer to the original because we're not translating out of the Hebrew if we have a copy of the Hebrew itself. But I would encourage all of you to just read it at one point because it is interesting. Skip all of the Apocrypha stuff. We don't need that. That's a discussion for another day. But if you read through the Bible every year, in the first half of the year or whatever, you read through the Old Testament, do it in the Septuagint, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not the Greek Orthodox Bible. It's been around before they were a thing. Anyway, okay, that's my my soapbox for the evening.
It'll expand your horizons. Okay, well, intense study, right? Okay, we're going to share our prayer requests and then have our prayer time. Just on the list that I put out is updated today, and I'll just, most of them have been on there the same. I'll try to overlook those and just go to the other ones, like Frank Evans down toward about the bottom third of that first column. He was back in the hospital with his lungs, and on dialysis. And the reason I just kind of reemphasize that is because he really is in really bad physical shape and everything, and needs our prayers. So just keep him in your prayers, if you will. And then Landon, continuing in the next level of his language study.
Sent out a newsletter this week. I don't know if anyone got it.
I did, and I looked at it, and I can't remember the exact things. He was asking.
He doesn't send me his newsletter, so I don't know what's up.
Well, you need to write him. I'll send him a little note and say you need to send a newsletter to your brother.
Ask him to send me one too.
Oh, you're not getting one?
No.
Well, for a while I wasn't getting them. About the last 3 weeks I've gotten one. But I didn't get the first ones that he had out. Okay, I'll send me that message and everything.
I looked at my junk mail and it's not in there.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I guess we could print it out and post it.
I could do that.
Do that. It's up to you.
That might be easier.
Our class would like to have one.
Okay. They're just looking for, they work in teams together, and they're looking for opportunities to be able to share the gospel with people. And that's what he's asking for, opportunities. Keep Kathy Williams in our prayers. And then I was talking about this before we started our study tonight about Don Collins. Not sure if he's still in the hospital now, but he was the other day, and he was coming home from somewhere and had to pull over the side of the road. And Johnny Crutchfield, he called Johnny Crutchfield, he's the only one available, went and picked him up and took him to Ulaga, and then took him to the hospital, and they has a UTI and he was dehydrated, and so they sent him back, but then he started hallucinating. So he went back to the hospital, and that was the day before yesterday when it started. So I'm not sure if he's still in the hospital or not, but keep him in our prayers. Israel and Gaza, things just keep going on over there in Ukraine and Russia. And Pastor Oleg. Unspoken, we have any new unspoken? Jack's Crab, keep him in our prayers with leukemia from Little Golf School. Cindy Hubbard and Pat Hubbard, everything's the same with them. It's just kind of continuing on there. And then Bob Thiel asked us to pray for his family. And then I did share, because Marcia, you weren't here Sunday, one of his grandsons just all for whatever reason decided to go to Winganon Baptist Church Sunday. And he's never done anything like that before, but we're just praying that, maybe something come out of that. Our military, Jim Writing's same.
Yes.
Laura Writing's the same. Janet Coates did pass away. She did get home, was just back in Oklahoma City for just a few short days when she passed away, and her funeral is on Monday in Enid, Oklahoma. I'll be there on Monday morning for that. Just pray for the family, and then Leslie.
Jennifer Smith's son, Jedediah, has he been deployed?
Didn't she say he had?
I think so.
I think so.
I don't know where he is, but
Well, they didn't say.
we won't tell it on Facebook.
Yeah. So keep him in our prayers, and then Adam Peters just has a whole lot of health medical issues. Pray for him, and then Roseanne Anderson is was on treatment number 8 the last time I contacted her, and Bud Carrion is back in the nursing home, and Mary signed papers today for him to be on hospice. So he's going on hospice probably tomorrow. I don't know how quickly they do. They usually don't take a long time, but so he is officially listed as on hospice. Al Casto, keep him in our prayers. Austin Clinton, just continue to pray for him. There's no understanding of why he has that fluid on his brain. Those who are dealing with storm damage in Claremore, I went back over to Claremore today, and all that mess over by the dairy was almost all cleaned up.
Really?
They worked hard on all
I was
that.
over there today. There's still a lot of mess.
Oh, there is, yeah.
And Samaritan's Purse is parked there at the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
And they had sent out an email that they're requesting help from anybody and everybody.
Oh, really? Okay. And I know the Mercy Meals, Mercy Chefs, I think it is. They're serving all kinds of meals and everything, but they fed the inmates at the jail for 3 days over there because they didn't have a way to fix food for them.
Oh, really?
So the Mercy Chefs did that. Yeah.
There's a lot of help for the people that we don't even know about.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica, which is Connie's daughter,
Mm-hmm.
has helped 40 different people get a shower and feed them in her home.
Okay. Well, I do know that they brought that thing in that they do the showers and I guess the
Well,
laundry
This is in her home.
on her own personal home.
Yeah.
Does she live in Claremore?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, she lives over there by not too far from the fairgrounds, I think.
Okay.
There's a lot of people helping a lot of people.
Yeah, she said that most people that have facilities are trying to help people that doesn't.
Yeah.
And I know that Claremore Public Schools, some of their football players and other students have helped. Sequoia Schools students have helped.
Yeah. You know, John's mother-in-law lives over there too.
Yeah.
And she lives in that same area where Jessica, I think, but she didn't have any electricity. And she's quite elderly and sickly. So Connie and Tom have got her staying at their house now, taking care of her, because she was dehydrated and practically starved to death. She had no food. All the food in her refrigerator was spoiled.
I know about that.
Yeah.
So was there damage to her house?
I don't think so. There was a lot of debris and stuff in the yard, but I don't think her house was hurt.
Because I find it hard to believe that the fire department did not check on her.
You know,
Because that's standard procedure. They go house to house.
for some reason, well, they might have just not found her. I don't know. But
Or she didn't remember that they talked to her.
That's
that
true,
very well
yeah.
Could be because she's quite feeble, you know.
Yeah.
But they said when they found her, she was just sitting in the dark. And of course, John and Debbie were going to come, but if they come now, they won't be able to come the 4th. And so Connie said, "Well, we'll take care of her." So there for a while, they thought they were going to take her to a hospital, but she's coming around. She's eating and drinking, and she's coming around.
Okay, just keep these people in our prayers. Also, the families of the missionaries that were murdered in Haiti. I think the Assembly of God Church is on the left as you're going into Claremore. I believe they've got the names of the husband and wife that were killed on their sign out front. I don't remember what that is.
It's such a shame.
Yeah. And then the family of Kellis Brown passed away also. I have last night on here, but that's an old phrase there. But his service is going to be July the 5th. He's being cremated, and they're going to have a memorial service on July the 5th at First Baptist Church in Sperry. Because they had just a lot of issues and stuff with family, and the Baptist evangelist who's going to do the service was all booked up unless beginning this week and next week, and then he wouldn't be open again and free again until July the 5th. So that's one of the reasons that they put that off so long. Any others?
Well, I have the praise. Miss Landry May arrived this morning at 9:22. She weighed 8 pounds and 4 ounces. She's 20 and 1/2 inches long.
How long?
20.5 inches.
20 and a half. Okay. That's pretty
She's a big
significant
baby.
size, yeah.
Pretty good sized baby.
Where's your on the column down there under taking number Ken McCoy? Is he taken off our list?
Yes, you can take Ken McCoy off the list.
Oh, okay. I'll mark that and take that off. Anyone else? Any others? Well, if not, then let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll dismiss tonight. Our Father, tonight we're grateful and thankful that we could come and gather here together this evening for this study in your word. And we know, Father, that through all of the Old Testament, that as you gave messages through your prophets and your servants, the Lord, the day and time that they lived in, they heard a word from you. And we just read, Father, and so many rejected your word, so many refused to repent, so many would turn away from you. And we know, Father, that you have dealt righteously with your people in all the past, as you deal righteously with all the people of the earth. We're just thankful, Father, that we have in our hearts and our minds and our understanding that you are a God who is sovereign. And when people question bad things and then they tend to blame you, we just understand, Father, that you do not give an account of yourself to any one person. Father, we give an account to you, and we thank you, Lord, for the grace and mercy of knowing your sovereignty in all things. We pray, Father, for these people that are on our list, and we ask, Lord, that you would bless them and be with them and just help each one through their time of need and their burdens, their losses and their sorrows, and, Father, even the victories and the joy that have come in so many ways as well. We thank you for all of these things, and We pray now, Father, you'll bless us as we leave and go our ways this evening and bring us back again on Sunday. We pray, Father, for our VBS next week, that you would touch the hearts and lives of many children and their family members. Lord, that the work of the ministry would be to your glory, your praise, and your honor. We ask now, Father, all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.